All right, so Living Your Design is the name of the full program. And as I said, this is kind of the first class in this series. And it's called Living Your Design because that is one of the main benefits of going through the program. We discover what it means to live as our unique self, which is something that's becoming more and more common, I think, in the world and would love to see more of. So introducing this very unusual human design system. It starts with this character right here. His birth name was Robert Allen Krakauer. He's from Canada. And back in 1987, he had a very, very profound mystical experience. And all of this information, and actually quite a bit more, was basically downloaded into his head over an 8-day period. And he spent the next 30 years of his life teaching until he eventually passed away. So he didn't create this system exactly. He received it and then translated and figured out ways to teach it to the rest of us so that it would be something that we can use to change our lives. And here's one of the things he said. Human design is logical, mechanical knowledge. It is not theorizing or philosophizing. It's about being able to do practical things with this knowledge, which brings practical benefits. Enjoy living your design. Enjoy the fact that there is truly valuable knowledge so that you too can participate in becoming a healthy, self-loving being. That self-love is so critically important and such a challenge for so many. And I know this has helped me and many people that I've had the opportunity to work with craft more of that self-love and rapport with who they are. So this is me and my design over here. For those that are familiar with this terminology, I'm a 2-4 emotional projector on the right angle cross of rulership. My design is suited to guide, advise, educate, and under the right circumstances, lead. I am still learning that last one, which I think is pretty common. Leadership is something that I keep on learning. I am certified as a Living Your Design guide through the official International Human Design School, and also as a BG5 career and business consultant, which is a branch of human design focused on its application to the world of work, making money, and applying our gifts in the material world. So that's what I mostly use when I'm working with clients one-on-one, but it's the same core knowledge, just a slightly different application. So why bother studying human design? What is the point to all of this? I want to ask some questions just for a moment. Imagine what it would be like to have a perfect personal navigation system for your own life. An inner compass or GPS that knows how to guide the unique individual that you are onto your highest path in life. What would that be worth? How would that change your life course going forward? Imagine having a custom owner's manual for yourself that shows you the unique way that you are designed to make decisions so that they align with your truth, your path, your highest self. Imagine not having anxiety before you make a decision and potentially regret afterward. There's a way. It's different for every person, and that's why it's tricky to figure out. But there is a way that works very, very well. Imagine having a precise blueprint of your life energy and being able to read that blueprint almost like an X-ray of your precious uniqueness, mind, body, and even soul. And of course, if you learn how to read that blueprint for yourself, you can read it for other people too. What would that be worth? How would that change your life and your relationships and possibly even your career and business? And of course, imagine loving and accepting yourself fully as who you are. I want to break for just a second. When I first found this information, saw my design, my first question was like, okay, great. How do I change that if I don't like it? How do I fix it, make it better? And I've had plenty of people ask a very similar question since then. It's a really understandable question. The thing is, it's not exactly what people asking that question want. What you really want is to release the unhelpful programming that you might have picked up from a variety of sources over your lifetime that make you feel like there's something wrong with you. That's the part that can be adjusted, and can be adjusted very powerfully. When you do that, what you discover underneath everything is that you love who you are. And I can say that with absolute confidence because love is a force of the universe. It is a force of consciousness, like gravity. It is the force that holds consciousness together. We can feel that when we're drawn together with other people through love. And at the very core, at a foundational level, self-love is your makeup, because that is the only force capable of holding your consciousness together into something that feels like an individual. So I guarantee that is what you discover if you go through. So what is human design? I covered very briefly where it came from, and this is really a tricky question. What is human design? It's kind of a Swiss Army knife because it can do so many things. But we'll look at how it's structured to start off with. This is a synthesis, a useful, powerful combination of both exoteric, in other words, scientific or external, observational knowledge systems, and also esoteric, hidden, inner knowledge systems. Human design brings together elements of quantum physics, believe it or not, biochemistry, and genetics. All of those vast bodies of information tie into the knowledge that is revealed through your design. That's on the exoteric or external side. On the esoteric side, human design synthesizes the chakra system that comes from the Hindu tradition, the Kabbalistic tree of life that comes through the Judaic knowledge system, elements of astrology, both Eastern and Western, and finally the I Ching. I don't know how to describe in brief terms how profound the I Ching is. I started studying it because I was trying to understand human design more. And once I dove in there, I found a lot that helped me understand design and a whole bunch more that is possibly, well, not possibly, the I Ching is one of the most profound understandings I've ever come across. Discussion for another time, but it is incorporated into human design for a very specific reason that we will get into. So you may have seen this diagram before. This is the human design kind of main diagram that we use. Some people call it your human design chart. Officially, it is called the body graph, which is where the title of that website, My Body Graph, comes from. And you can see some of the elements that we were just talking about knit together into this one kind of weird looking but very elegant diagram. Along the outside, we see these different symbols that are made up of stacks of lines. This is the I Ching. It's an ancient Chinese system that is somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 years old, depending on which sources you pay attention to and how you define things, but very, very old no matter how you look at it. There are 64 of these different symbols, and they each have very specific meaning, which is mapped onto different points in the human energy system. Here we have the zodiac wheel, another very, very ancient body of knowledge used in many cultures across the globe. That's used somewhat in China, although a lot of the interpretations are different. It's used in Western astrology. And you notice that these symbols, which most of us have at least heard of, even if we haven't studied it. By the way, when I first heard about this stuff, I dismissed it as obvious baloney because astrology, really? Come on, obviously that's got to be baloney. But it's not. I had proven to me multiple times in many different ways that there is something very real to it. There is some scientific rationale for how it works. It's not about gravity, and we'll cover that. You see the body graph that I mentioned, incorporating these elements. And you may notice there are 9 shapes here. These are similar to the chakras that we talked about, but there are 9, whereas the traditional system has 7. We'll talk about why that is also in a minute. And then finally, you may notice these lines connecting the centers together. This comes from another very profound knowledge system known as the Tree of Life, or Kabbalah. And in Kabbalah, there are similar centers, kind of processing hubs, or let's just say centers, and they interact with each other in very specific ways. And that interaction is described through these connections. In the Tree of Life, they're known as paths, and in human design, a similar idea is known as channels. These channels represent our talents when they are defined, something that we can always do. Now, how did we get from this traditional 7 chakra system, which has been in use for a long, long time and been described by many profound teachers throughout the years, to this diagram? Well, part of the download that Ra Uru Hu received in 1987 is that our species is, shockingly, still undergoing evolution. We are still evolving. Science would obviously agree with that. Evolution doesn't stop. It doesn't complete. It's a process that keeps on going. And what was revealed to Ra is that we evolved or mutated around 1781 from 7 chakras to 9. The function of them changed a little bit. The function of our entire system changed, because the way that one operates with 9 chakras is fundamentally different than the way one operates with 7. So we have 9 now. There are correspondences. You can find kind of familiar parts of the description of these centers if you are familiar with the chakras, but it is quite different also. Now, how does this work? How possibly can something as distant as a planet or some other feature of the solar system influence life here on Earth and who we are? That sounds kind of hard to believe. And yet, for thousands of years, that's how humans understood how the universe works. So there has been quite a bit of theorizing as to how that could actually work. A lot of fans of traditional astrology have said that it has something to do with gravity. Gravity affects water on Earth, the moon creates the tides, and so on. But then the scientists say, yeah, but if you're dealing with something like Pluto or even Mars, which is fairly close, the effect of gravity is so small that we can barely register. There's no way that could affect us. And they might be right. Maybe gravity has some effect, but that is not how this works according to the human design revelation. The way it works is very different, kind of weird, but really, really interesting. It comes down to something called a neutrino. A neutrino is a very, 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 I could keep on saying very, very tiny subatomic particle. Neutrinos are produced in nuclear reactions. The main source of them is the sun and other stars like it throughout the universe. In the nuclear fire core of a star, many things are produced. The elements, the physical elements that make up our bodies and the planets are produced. Light is produced, of course. There's also radio waves and a whole bunch of other things. And then trillions and trillions and trillions of these neutrinos are emanated outward. These neutrinos form almost like an ocean. And this is the medium that carries consciousness. Ra was told that neutrinos carry information. And our experience of consciousness is kind of about filtering that vast array of neutrinos in a certain way that's unique to us. Neutrinos penetrate through solid objects, unlike sunlight. You have something like 3 trillion of them going through every square inch of your body every second, tens of billions per square centimeter. Now, for neutrinos to carry information, they need to have mass. And in 1987, when Ra received this information, that was not certain, according to scientists on Earth. They did not know if neutrinos had mass. He was told that they do, and they carry information, and that's how this works. Later, that was verified scientifically. It has been verified that neutrinos do, in fact, have a very, very, very tiny amount of mass. So at least that part of this knowledge has been verified. Now, how does that actually apply to human design, the body graph, and everything else? Well, the way it works is neutrinos are produced in the sun. About 70% of what goes through us here on Earth comes directly from the sun, and then the rest comes from the star field. All the other stars in the universe, they're broadcasting these neutrinos all the time throughout their entire lifespan of billions of years. And so there's a lot coming from all directions. When a body that is massive enough, like a planet, is present, the neutrino stream goes through that planet, but since the mass is so large, it creates a little tweak in this stream. Imagine smooth water just kind of flowing and then having one little pebble in the middle of that stream. Where that pebble is, it's not going to be a smooth surface anymore. There's going to be a little ripple, right? So that's what the planets do to the neutrino stream. Everything else where there's no planet is just kind of smooth surface, and then a planet gets in the way, makes a little tweak. That tweak corresponds to a specific point in this body graph, a specific point in the wheel, a specific hexagram. So at any point in time, you have an array of planets that are in these different positions, and the little tweak that that planet causes in the stream translates into a different flow of life wherever that is received, including here on Earth. So we are experiencing different energy signatures, different themes all of the time, depending on what's going on in the solar system. And at certain pivotal moments in our lives, most significantly at birth, we get an imprint from that tweak that stays with us. There are other times, not just birth, but that's one of the main ones. So that's how one of these gates gets activated. Now, I mentioned that this incorporates biochemistry and genetics. Well, the I Ching has a structure that is identical to our genetic code. The I Ching has 64 hexagrams. Each of those symbols is divided into 6 lines. Each of those lines means something specific too, by the way. And in our DNA code, there are 64 codons, with 6 groups of amino acids per codon. There have been a number of books completely separate from human design written on this correspondence. How did they know? Or if the people that came up with the I Ching didn't know, then how did they come up with something that has this same fundamental structure? Really good question. I found an answer. It'll be a little bit much to go into in this class unless someone wants to ask me about it later. But for now, I'll just say that the I Ching is a representation, or at least can be used as a representation of our genome itself. And that's what human design does. So putting the pieces that we've talked about together so far, we have neutrinos coming from stars in all kinds of different places throughout the universe. Those neutrinos get tweaked or kind of filtered by massive bodies like planets, which activate or sort of emphasize a certain hexagram or theme. These hexagrams get translated into the gates, little teeny numbers on the human design body graph. Sometimes when you have the right gates activated, that forms a channel or pathway. In other words, an interaction, a dynamic interchange of energy and information between 2 of these centers in your system. When that happens, it activates the center. And later we'll talk about what that means to have a center activated. Okay. Now I mentioned we get imprinted at significant points in life. Mainly, we're looking at birth. If you think about it, that is the moment where we have our very, very first experience on our own. Very first time you exist as a distinct, separate individual. So, since nothing really, or not much, came before that, that is the moment in time when you are most receptive. And so, whatever's happening at that moment forms an imprint that we carry with us. This is the idea that traditional astrology is based on. When you're born, you get an imprint, and that imprint is carried with you for the rest of your life. Now, something that human design incorporates that traditional astrology doesn't is a second imprint, or more accurately, a first. Our body gets imprinted roughly 3 months before birth. So we have a certain imprint carried in our physical form, and then another one that is carried in our conscious personality that comes from the moment of our birth. So when you put those 2 imprints together, we have 13 in the body. These come before birth, and they are unconscious. We are generally not aware of us doing this stuff. All of the themes represented by these red activations or gates. It's something our body does. So we can kind of observe ourselves doing these things the way you'd observe someone else, but we're not usually conscious of them. Then, the moment of birth conveys another imprint, another 13 activations, and these are not in the body, they're more in our personality. So these are conscious, and they are usually more what we think we are. This is more who we think we are, because these are the parts of ourselves that we can more easily recognize. But the deeper truth is that we are both, right? Everyone has a unique body, everyone has a unique personality. So understanding yourself really is understanding the marriage of the 2, how the 2 fit together, your body and personality or mind or spirit or whatever you want to call it, how it comes together to form a living being. And I've never found any system of knowledge aside from human design that is able to handle this unconscious information, although I have found it, again, to be very accurate. So we have, this is a metaphor. If you imagine yourself as like a car, right? What do these different parts represent? Well, the car itself, the vehicle, would be the body that we are riding or carried within, right? And this is unconscious, but it is our physical form that we ride in for our lifetime until the body no longer functions. Then we have this conscious part, who we think we are, and this part doesn't have as much control as it thinks it does. That's one of the real kind of kicks in the pants that comes from studying this, or actually many other disciplines have said basically the same thing. I remember reading a book, I think it was called Made to Stick. It was quite a few years ago. And basically it said that the information we absorb, if you visualized it, you could imagine it as the size of a football field. And the amount of that information that we absorb every moment of every day that we're conscious of is about the size of a laptop screen in that football field. So most of what's going on is unconscious processing. It's kind of automatic from the perspective of the passenger. So who's really in charge, right? How do we steer this ship? It can be tricky. The third part, right, is the synthesis of the two, the marriage of the two. Now, this is related to a specific component of our design called the magnetic monopole, which will be covered a bit more thoroughly in another class. But this represents the driver, right? And it ties together our unconscious body and our conscious personality through the force. I don't mean this in like a cheesy Hallmark card type way, but through like the physical force binding of love. And that's how we operate. So this part of us is the passenger, and it's usually trying to drive. And that is really stressful. Imagine trying to drive if you don't actually have the steering wheel and pedals. And you can't see out the front window. You're kind of looking out the side. Real hard to drive under those circumstances. And if you feel like that's what you're supposed to be doing, then life is really stressful. And of course, that's not actually how it's supposed to work, but that is definitely how it seems most of the time for most of us. Human design can be quite complex, but this is actually about self-teaching. It's about getting to know the real you. And it requires some patience and trust in yourself. And the idea is to take this on as an experiment. Your human design can give you a roadmap. It can identify certain mechanisms that are playing a big part in your life, but you still have to get to know how they work in the unique way that they work for you. So you start to pay attention to these mechanisms, observe these patterns, and get to know yourself in a whole new way. And that carries you through the very first step in beginning this experiment. The other reason it's called an experiment, by the way, is because you're not supposed to just take my word for it or anyone else's. This is about trusting yourself. So if any of this doesn't resonate, if you try experimenting with it and it doesn't work for you, then ignore everything I've said, because maybe this isn't the right thing for you at this time. And that's okay. Applying, and that doesn't happen very often, by the way, in my experience. It seems to work for people. It seems to resonate. But if it doesn't, then of course, trust that too. This knowledge can help us live a more conscious life. How else can we become conscious of what is unconscious and the synthesis of the conscious and unconscious? And this can help improve our significant relationships in life, because with more permission to be ourselves, we naturally give everyone around us more permission to be themselves. And that's the key, or a key at least, to good relating, because you can't create intimacy if you're not being the real you. Otherwise, it's just mask interacting with mask, and it doesn't create a feeling of intimacy because it is actually a facade. This is a question that I invite you to just kind of consider for yourself. What holds you back from reaching your true potential in life? This is another common question that I get from clients, and sometimes it's not really verbal. they just have this feeling, I could be more. There's more in me that I'm not really expressing right now, or I'm not able to express right now. You went to school, maybe talked to a guidance counselor, teacher, it says, or even a parent, you're not reaching your full potential. Some of you might say, I am reaching my full potential. And if that is your answer, that is fantastic. And I would love to talk to you about that at some other time and find out how it's working for you. Most of us have a feeling that we could be more of ourselves. And yet it seems like there's something kind of in the way that makes that really hard. So what is it that's holding us back from being fully ourselves, loud on the world stage, or maybe not even on the stage, maybe just at home, because that's different for different people. Not everyone's meant to be a public figure. Some people are, of course, right? But whatever it is for you, for most of us, it feels like there's something in the way. What is that? In addition to the conscious and the unconscious, there's another aspect of our design to look at. This is called definition and openness. Now, definition is the term for the parts of your design that are colored in one way or another. It could be different color, like center here is defined, filled in these channels. This is obviously just a representational illustration. No one's design looks like that, but we all have some parts that are colored in. What this represents is that imprint that I was talking about earlier. These parts of us tend to be fixed and don't change very much. And they generally don't need to change very much. They just sort of work in a certain way. So the parts of us that are colored in are fixed. They represent a unique imprint. No two are exactly alike. These are the parts of us that are reliable because they're fixed into place, because they work in a certain way. We can rely on them to continue working in that way. And these are the parts of us that transmit to the outside world. They kind of broadcast because it's something that we're carrying. So we carry that with us into every situation. And it is something that other people can pick up. And they do all the time. Now, what about this half that is white or blank, if you prefer that term? This is what we call openness. There's a long debate in psychology that is generally called nature versus nurture. And it boils down to, do we have some hardwired nature that is pre-programmed and we just kind of carry out that program in our lives? We maybe think we're making decisions, but it's actually just mechanical interactions that we don't have any control over. Or is it nurture? Are we born as a tabula rasa, a blank slate that is programmed by society and culture and a whole bunch of other things? And the understanding of human design is that it is, of course, actually both at once. It's both. We have some parts of us that are hardwired, our nature, you could say, and there are parts of us that are receptive to programming from a variety of different sources. This is where we pick up what is called conditioning. And these are the parts of us that are nurtured over time and can go in a wide variety of different ways, both positive and negative. Conditioning is kind of another word for programming, right? We are programmed mentally in a variety of ways. We're programmed socially in a variety of ways. And this is not a categorically bad thing at all. It can be a very good thing, right? You grow up in a society that teaches you how to interact with other individuals. If you grew up completely by yourself, isolated, you'd have no conditioning on how to be a social being in interaction with other beings, right? So we need this, but often we pick up conditioning that doesn't actually help us, and it can hurt us a lot. So where does conditioning come from? This is not an exhaustive list. There are many more sources than this, but this is kind of the major ones. We are conditioned by our family. Our parents teach us all kinds of things, directly and indirectly. Sometimes we pick up stuff from them they don't even know they're communicating. Sometimes we pick up stuff from them that they wouldn't want to communicate. Sometimes we pick up their pain, and they're actually doing everything they can to not share that with us, but they can't help but transmit some of it. So we get conditioned by our parents, we get conditioned by our friends, definitely by lovers, right? That has a big influence on us. Interesting, not many people know this, we are conditioned or programmed by the food that we take in. Food is genetic information that changes how your body works. The food you eat changes your personality, changes your body, changes how you work. We're programmed by education, media, culture, the society that we are a part of, the various religion or religions that we might be a part of or were a part of at some point in the past. In many ways, we're conditioned by the earth itself. The system of nature and the natural world has an influence on us, right? We have to learn how to live here. And with the kind of mechanism of neutrinos, we're even conditioned by stars and other aspects of the solar system. So what all of this conditioning does is, when it isn't the right conditioning for you and it unfortunately sticks, then it creates what we call the not self that prevents your true self from being able to completely express. And that's the problem. That's what holds us back from being able to reach our true potential. It's the things we learned that weren't meant for us. Maybe they were meant for someone else. Maybe it was helpful for someone else, or maybe it was just trauma or unfortunate circumstance or whatever. But we pick up this unhelpful conditioning. Usually there's a lot of fear, often a lot of pain wrapped up in it, and we come up with strategies to compensate for these fears and pains, and then we end up playing out those strategies instead of being who we really are. So, in a way, your true self is represented by this imprint. This is the same design, by the way, just a different representation of it. And you notice the not self is the open centers. We'll go into more detail on this later, but this is one of the big keys to reading this complex diagram quickly and easily. Whenever you see an open center, you know that that part of that person is open, receptive, flexible, and subject to programming and conditioning. So, pretty much all the time, there's some exceptions, but pretty rare, just about all the time, the big problems that a person has in their life, they're tied to the themes of these open centers. This is where we pick up the pain. This is where we pick up the trauma. This is where we pick up the unhelpful programming. And unhelpful is not even necessarily the most accurate term. The programming might have been helpful at some point in our lives. Maybe we really needed it when we were 3 and there was an angry parent or something like that we couldn't control. That could be the case. But still, it tends to get picked up in these open areas because, I don't know if you've noticed, an experience that could be horribly traumatizing for one kid, another kid, same age, doesn't even notice, don't even care. Doesn't matter to them. And it comes down to the theme of the center. Is it open? So that's a part of that person where they're sensitive and we're absorbing that trauma, or was it about something that's filled in for them so it's not really sensitive, so they just kind of doesn't even really go in. There's no room for that programming to go in because the program is already written. I want to preface, that does not mean that these parts of you, the open parts, are bad. That is not what it means at all. Actually, those parts of you are where you have some of the highest, most refined sensitivity. Sensitivity is the ability to pick up information. So these are the areas where you have the potential to become an expert, to develop wisdom, profound wisdom. But you don't get access to that potential wisdom if you are trapped playing some game out of fear in the not self. It prevents you from accessing the wisdom that can come from the exact same mechanism in your system. So that's the game. Our pure behavioral nature is designed to emerge without resistance into the world. If we didn't pick up any unhelpful programming, then we would just be ourselves. End of story. That's it. Right? We would be the person we were born to be. But life here on Earth is a little bit more complex than that. And so we have all of this conditioning to deal with also that can mask our true self. These parts are not empty. They're not broken at all. They represent the potential for profound wisdom. And you could say that these themes are what we are here to study in this lifetime. They're what we are exploring. So, of course, that can't be bad. It's not bad. It's just where we tend to collect our pain and trauma. And so, it's where we tend to get pulled off track in life. The combination of these two aspects of ourselves, our true self and our not self, our nature and what we have picked up through nurture over a lifetime, forms a sort of binary between the parts of us that are fixed and the parts of us that are flexible. Neither are superior. One other thing, by the way, it's a common kind of beginner's mistake to think, oh, okay, well, it's better to have this center filled in. That means that this part of me works better. That's not what it means. It means it works differently. And that's all it means. Just different. The function is different when it's filled in than when it's blank. You also, incidentally, kind of side note, you'll tend to not be very interested in the parts of life represented by the centers that are filled in. You're not very curious about those parts of life. You don't really care because they just sort of work in a certain way and it's not very interesting. There's not much to explore. I do this in a certain way. I do that in a certain way. I don't really pay attention to it. This stuff is fascinating, right? This is what calls our attention because these parts of us don't work in a consistent way. So we're always trying to figure it out, always trying to solve the problem we think is represented there. It's not actually a problem. The only problem is the way we relate to it, but that's usually how it gets interpreted. As we become aware of our not self through our experiment with human design, we slowly become aware of our true self. For some of us, this is really buried. For some of us, it's closer to the surface. I hope it's closer to the surface for you because it feels amazing to be able to live as you. It is very, very, very stressful to live as not self. It hurts, actually, all the time. And this can conceal our true self. Knowing and accepting yourself is the path to loving yourself. And of course, that doesn't mean that we don't make mistakes or maybe wish that we'd done things differently in the past. At times, we all have those learning experiences. That is part of life. But when you are free to live as the real you, then what happens is the mistakes are worth it. You might make a choice that doesn't go the way you hoped, but you learned something you needed to learn. That's worth it. You don't have the regret. You don't have the stress. You don't have the experience of beating yourself up all the time, wishing you'd done something different. That goes away. When you're looking at your design and you look at what's activated and colored in, you're looking at what is fixed and reliable. Those parts of yourself represented by the filled in centers, the parts of life that are not interesting to you, that are boring, that's the part of yourself that is actually most trustworthy. And those parts of you don't change much. And it makes you unique. That's why everything in human design is based on trusting what is fixed to make decisions. This is the big key. Our attention gets drawn to those open areas where it seems like we have all kinds of problems and pain and trauma. And since this absorbs our attention, we tend to start trying to live life, make decisions, and guide ourselves out of that open area, which is actually not self. And that doesn't work. It pulls us off track. What does work is trusting the parts of ourselves that are filled in, fixed, and reliable to make the decisions and guide us. And that actually gives us freedom as a passenger to explore those fascinating open areas. The decisions made from your definition, the parts of you that are filled in, will be correct for you because they'll be consistent. Now, how to do that is different for different designs. I'm just covering the general principle here. But when you make decisions out of the openness, right? Remember how flexible, sensitive, and receptive that is. Well, that can't guide you correctly because it will change day to day, depending on who you're around, what's going on that day, what you ate for dinner, and who knows what else. You can't rely on that stuff to guide you. It's valuable, right? But it can't make the right choices. Openness, whether it's a center, a gate, or a channel, doesn't mean that you don't have that in your life, right? If some part of you is white, and it is for everybody, it doesn't mean it's empty. It doesn't mean it's broken. It doesn't mean it needs to be fixed. It's just receptive. That's what it means. Those parts of you are where you receive information from everyone and everything else. And this is where we can get what's called homogenized. The influence of big cultures, big societies, religions, school systems, and so on is to try to make everyone kind of behave the same. And to a degree, we need that. We need, some principles that let us work together and connect with each other and interact and so on. But if we let that conditioning, homogenizing force take over, then what happens is we lose access to our true self, our uniqueness, and that means we can't share our real gifts with the world because we don't even have access to them for ourselves anymore. It's buried under too much conditioning, under too much trying to fake it and pretend like we're the same as everybody else. So my recommendation, what I feel in my soul, what I've learned from human design, what I've seen work for other people, is to go the opposite direction and be more unique. Get weird with it, feel free to get weird with who you are a bit, because what else is worth it? What's worth it in life if you're not really yourself? Even if you achieve massive success. So one of my favorite examples is Ted Turner. Made billions of dollars in media, and by any external metric, massive success in life. But the story is, when he made his first $1 billion, and that's with a B, right, in the billionaire territory, he went outside, shook his fist at the sky, and said, "Are you happy now?" to his dead father. Massive external success, and clearly he was miserable. Right? And I don't want that for you. I don't want that for anybody, because it's incredibly painful and we don't need to have that experience. Your path to success is not the same as anybody else's. There are patterns, right? We can have guides that help us get there, but it's got to be an expression of you as a unique individual. Human design teaches us about our uniqueness, what it is to be uniquely ourselves within the totality. If you look at this entire map, by the way, if you imagine having every single thing activated, what that represents is the species as a whole, all human experience. So we play are individual little parts of it. This person, this is my wife's chart, by the way, has these themes at work in her design, right? And that makes her unique, different from everybody else. She plays these little parts in the human play, you could say, right? And she doesn't have to be playing this part or that part. That's other people's job. She learns about it. She observes that, but she doesn't have to do that. And if she's caught up thinking that she does, then life will be painful. So the question is, how do you start this experiment? How do you begin getting to know the real, true you that might be buried under a couple different layers of conditioning? And that is what this course is designed to do. That's what Living Your Design is meant for. It's called an awakening program because the idea is it will show you how to awaken to your true nature. I'll tell you what actually convinced me that human design was worth looking into. Because like I said, when I first was introduced to it, I thought it was obviously baloney. I spent several years of my life going through a very, very intense, brutal, even spiritual process. I don't recommend to almost anybody to do what I did, but it's what I needed, and going through that changed my life. I wasn't alone. I had a handful of people with me that were going through this same process. I'll describe it briefly. You essentially program your ego self to devour itself. It's very painful. You keep on doing that until your ego can't do anything else, and eventually there's some awakening. But it's not fun. It's not easy, and it's not the right thing for most people. What happened is I got to observe a number of people that were going through this, some of them taking it very far and really having some very deep awakening experiences. And they would usually start living their life different. It's like, oh, I need to stop making promises to people. That's not right for me. Or I need to trust my instincts more. Or I should stop inserting myself in conversation. You know, it's just different things for different people. And I noticed this and I thought, that's weird. But everyone seems to be getting something different from their spiritual process. I didn't really understand that at the time, but I noticed it. And I only understood years later when I finally started studying design. I brought up the design of those friends that I'd been learning with and learning from. And what I discovered is the people who went the deepest through this process started doing what their design recommended without any knowledge of it. It's just what they did when they released the conditioning. And the pattern was very consistent, different for each person, but when they got rid of the garbage, they started doing what their design recommended they should do. So that was a bit of a trip, let me tell you. And it told me that there was something worth looking at here. And so that's why I started studying. This awakening program is not anywhere near as brutal. It is not as difficult, and this is something that I can wholeheartedly recommend to anybody because I've seen it work and I've seen it improve people's lives over and over and over again. You will go through a variety of transformations studying this material, going through this program. The transformations will be unique to you. They will lead you to different behaviors that are not the same as what your classmate might go through. And that is the point. You're going to get to that uniqueness. Being authentic liberates you, and your purpose in life naturally unfolds. I got to observe that firsthand, and then later found an easier way. So what's the course about? We'll cover a lot of information. One of the key pieces of information are the 4 types. This was mentioned in one of the questions. There are 4 main types, and these are types because they represent different aura shapes. The aura, your energy field, functions differently if you are a different type. Generators, which is most people, have an aura that is open and enveloping, and that means that they need to respond to life, and that response will lead them accurately down their best path in life. There's more to it, but in short notes, that's the main key. Projectors, very different aura shape. Instead of open and enveloping, it's focused and penetrating. So I'm a projector, by the way. What that means is we are gifted at being able to guide other people because our aura is structured so that it penetrates the other person's. And if that interaction isn't invited, it feels invasive, kind of like surgery. Right? If you invite a surgeon to work on you, life-saving, life-changing, very valuable. And if someone tries to operate on you and you didn't ask for it, that's a horror movie, right? So projectors are guides, but we need to be invited. Otherwise, our gifts don't feel right. So that means we have a very different purpose, very different strategy we need to follow in order to find our version of success. Manifestors are fairly rare, and their aura is kind of like a hard bubble. The energy pushes outward and is actually kind of repelling. This doesn't mean that they're repulsive as people at all. It's not what it means. I have some of my dearest friends are manifestors, and they can be lovely people. But energetically, it's kind of hard to get close to them because that's what their energy field does. And the gift that this brings is a forceful impact. They're here to impact others with what they choose to manifest. To do that without creating resistance, they have to inform people first, and they usually don't want to do that. There's a good reason for it. We'll get into that more in the class. And finally, we have reflectors. These are very rare. I had a session with a reflector just a few days ago. Only 1% of the population. And the interesting thing about them is they have 0 of these centers filled in. It's all white. Very rare to have that configuration. And so their gift is they don't transmit. They don't have definition, right? Remember, definition is what transmits outward. So they are reflective. They reflect the world around them. And so they work kind of like a canary in a coal mine. They operate best at the heart of a community or business, some kind of enterprise like that. They can usually tell if some aspect of the community is unhealthy. It's just obvious to them. And if they ignore that, then what happens is they get sick physically. It's reflected in their body. They have the deepest potential wisdom, and if they are not aligned with themselves, then they are often very, very sick, unfortunately. So we need to work differently in life. Different things bring success to different people. And a question from Claire, I'm a manifesting generator. Where does that put me? That's kind of a hybrid of generator and manifester, but really it's generator. What that means is you are a generator that has sometimes, under the right circumstances, access to manifestation potential. In human design, manifestation is not the same thing as the law of attraction. It is the ability to take independent action, to do something completely outside the pre-existing stream of events. And this is kind of unpredictable by nature, and it can be uncomfortable for people around. But what it translates into is people with this capability are doers, and they can kind of just make magic happen. For a manifesting generator, your manifestation needs to work within the rules of generators. So generators respond to life. You're all about life force energy, right? So you manifest in response. And if you try to force some manifestation that's not flowing from your response, then it will tend to backfire. Now, that's not true for manifestors. They work differently, but that's manifesting generator. In this course, we cover an in-depth study of all 9 centers. And as I said, this is kind of the key to gaining what I've been calling that X-ray vision. When you understand what the centers do and how they work, then all you have to do is look at someone's design, and in 5 seconds, you know where they are going to tend to have problems in life. You're going to know what their pain most likely is. Now, if you're a therapist, NLP practitioner, coach, something like that, now, of course, you need to go through processes to draw out from your client what they're struggling with and so on. But having this X-ray as a guide to work with takes things to a whole nother level. Don't have time to go into this in depth, but just as an example, this head center, it's called the pressure center, and it's about inspiration. What this represents is the mental pressure to answer questions. Right? Questions make us think. And that's how this works. Thinking happens down here in the ajna. So we pick up inspiration to think. We pick up interesting questions we want to answer, and then they get processed down here. This is where we conceptualize things. And then eventually that conceptualization can be communicated out the throat, which is manifestation, speaking, and doing. There's lots of other parts. This center represents our physical intelligence and awareness, our immune system, our instinct. The root represents adrenaline, pressure. The sacral represents life force energy, including sexual energy. It's basically the same force, just gets applied in different ways. We have emotional energy here. We have ego energy here. This center is dealing with themes of self-worth, willpower, and value. Now, little clue, this is the biggest pain point for 70% of the population. The ego center, 70%. Because imagine if you have this processing center that evaluates worth, open and receptive and flexible and sensitive to trauma and conditioning. Well, what happens then is your sense of your own worth is flexible, receptive to conditioning and trauma, and you're going to be looking to the outside environment to indicate whether or not you're good enough and questioning whether or not you're worthy. It can be incredibly painful, right? So if I see this little triangle white on someone's design, I know that their sense of self-worth is not that it's not there or that they automatically have poor self-esteem, but I know that part of them is sensitive. And I know, just the world being what it is, that they probably have some trauma there. Probably. There's probably some issue of self-worth that's at work in their design. And if I were a coach, therapist, which I am, coach, I would know that this is an area that we need to address. And I want to help them understand that this, how do I prove my worth, is an illusion. It is a game. It is not true. You have absolutely nothing to prove. Your value is infinite. Otherwise, you would not exist. Reality doesn't make mistakes, period. Obviously, the conversation would be a little bit different if it were a session, but just to give you an idea of how powerful this can be, right? Just 9 centers, and you look at anyone's chart, yours, your lover, your child, you know where they're sensitive, you know where they're going to need some extra care, and you know what parts of themselves to guide them to trust. And that trusting, right? This is something that is called your authority in human design terminology. And what that really means is which of those centers is the one that's meant to make your decisions. We experience them often as different inner voices, and they frequently conflict. Mind says one thing, heart says another thing, instinct says another thing. Which one do I trust? Well, there is one that is the most trustworthy for you. It's called your authority, and that means It's a part of you that guides your life, and you don't need an outside authority telling you what to do. That's not how we're meant to work. You don't need some political leader telling you what to do. You don't need some boss necessarily telling you what to do. If you're working in a company, obviously you need to follow direction, but how to live your life, who to be, right? Only you can answer those questions. Since we have so many inner voices, it can be tricky to figure out which one. It can take decades sometimes of trial and error to figure that out. It's of course possible to figure it out, and many people do figure it out, but it takes a long time. What if there's a shortcut? And there is. And this is the best one that I've found. Your inner authority is the source of inner guidance for making decisions as yourself, as oneself, your own personal GPS. All of us have one. It works differently for different people. But when we live by our own authority, we know how to make decisions that are correct for us as unique individuals, which might be very different than the process that would lead our partner to a correct decision. So in this program, we cover those topics in a great deal of depth and quite a few other things as well. There's a page I'll link at the end that has a full curriculum listed, all of the things that are talked about. And even that, of course, is not completely exhaustive. There will be more. We will learn the mechanics of human design and how to practice correct decision making. And we will do this as a group, having the kind of ironic advantage of using some of that social conditioning pressure to our advantage is very powerful. We will learn to see the conditioning and not self behaviors in our designs. Where are you going off track? Where are you caught up playing some game that by definition is unwinnable? We will learn to be wise about our openness instead of playing those unwinnable games, and nurture its hidden potential. And this is key to unlocking your natural superpowers. The open centers actually represent super sensitivity. Those are the parts of you where you are aware of much more than other people might be, especially if you are able to undo or let go of the conditioning and access the wisdom buried underneath. And we'll learn to understand the design of other people in our lives, family, friends, coaching clients, and so on. It will allow you to give them priceless insight that can improve their lives, and definitely, even if they don't want to hear that for whatever reason, it will improve your relationship with them. Because once again, when you feel completely free to be your unique self, you naturally want the same thing for the people close to you. And now you have the potential for intimacy instead of just facade bumping up against facade. Our life experience is all we have. Human design is the knowledge of how to be free to change your experience for the better. And that's what I wish for you. So, what is the time investment involved in learning this superpower? This program is 8 weeks. We'll cover 8 weekly sessions. They'll be about like this. It'll be the same time, same day, same length, 1.5 to 2 hours. I try to keep it to 90 minutes, but I often want to convey a lot more information, so it sometimes goes a little over. So 90 minutes to 2 hours. I like questions. We will cover all kinds of things. You will ask questions that I might not have thought of. And if it's really going well, you'll ask questions that I've never heard before. That would be awesome. Challenging, but I love that. And finally, what is the financial investment? We will cover 8 weekly live sessions, video recordings for every session, transcriptions of all lessons. Completion of this course conveys an official certificate that is required to take more advanced human design classes. This is actually a prerequisite requirement. And there is a 60-day unconditional money-back guarantee. Now, I'm not going to charge you $2,000. I think that's what the course is worth. I believe that that's what the course is worth. What would it be worth to you to know how to make better decisions for the rest of your life in every situation? What would it be worth to eliminate friction and resistance from your life? What would it be worth to not have anxiety or even dread when you have to make a decision and then regret afterward? One of my clients, I've been working with him for about a year and a half continually. He said if he learned this stuff 10 years ago, it would have saved him a decade of trial and error. He would have reached his goals in life and in his business 10 years faster. I didn't ask him to say that. That was just his take on it. I agree. And this is what I've seen from many other people too. So I think $2,000 would actually be kind of a bargain for this class, but I'm not going to price it that way. I want to make this as affordable as possible so that it is absolutely a no-brainer. So instead of $2,000, you can enroll today for just $555. That covers all 8 weeks. That covers admission to the members area, question and answer, including over email if needed. I prefer live questions. That works a bit better for me, but I'm available over email also. And if for any reason you're not satisfied, no questions asked, guaranteed refund. All you have to do is just let me know that it wasn't working for you for whatever reason, and I will give you your money back. So there is no risk to you at all. Shona just commented, if I'd known all this 20 years ago, I wouldn't have married my ex, but I'm glad I did because I love my kids. I can relate to that. I can relate to that. You know, sometimes painful experiences lead to good things, right? We just want to make sure that if we're doing something that's a quote unquote mistake, it's the right mistake. We want to make sure it's the right one. There is a link in the chat where you can go if you would like to register for this class, even if you just want to kind of try it out and see if it works for you. This is an experiment I am inviting you on. We're going to start December 1st and we'll go through to January 19th. Thank you for joining me. I will now look at the chat and catch up on questions that I might have missed. And you are invited to ask anything else or share whatever might feel right for you.